All right, it looks like the live stream is up, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Is that you, Abbas, again? Are you the only one here? All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with the repl.it assignment. This was the barcode scanner. This was a 2D array assignment, which is beyond what the AP exam will actually ask you, but I thought it was a really good question, and I think it was good for getting you to really think in that AP style. So I'll try to go through the solution kind of quickly, but I am going to walk through it. I'm not just going to show you the answers, because I think it's a really fun solution to this, and hopefully I can get it right on the first try here. So our has stuck sensor is actually the one where most people had the issue was this particular method, even though it's the part A, which usually is the easier method to solve, the easier problem to solve. In this case, a lot of people struggle with it because we need to work with nested loops. So what do we need to do? We need to find if a row, so the second set of our 2D array, one of the rows here along the side, one of those is either all ones or all zeros. So how can we solve this? Basically what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to loop through, and we're going to want to look at each row in terms of its own unit. But we need to loop through the entire 2D array. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create Are we back yet? Let's see here. Click on the live button. Okay, we're back. Yes, Sarah, so yes, they did cut 2D arrays, Sarah, but this is a good challenge to push us beyond what we need to know. Unlike, say, our history classes or something like that, where knowing extra information isn't necessarily going to help you on the AP exam, our AP exam is different. So going beyond the AP exam will actually help us because it forces us to think algorithmically. It forces us to use Java. It can't really hurt us. Whereas, say, like a history exam, knowing extra information about, I don't know, like the French Revolution that's not going to be on the exam, that's not going to help you. In our case, it does help us. So I'm not too concerned about pushing you beyond what the AP exam asks for because it's going to use the same information that we do, that we're using for this question. Looks like my stream quality is fairly poor here. And buffering more. Nope, we're buffering even more. Okay. So, hopefully it's not buffering too bad on your guys' end. And I will continue here talking about this. If you have not done this repl.it assignment, please go do it and just try to challenge yourself through it. Even after watching this, it takes a couple times through to understand what I'm doing. And then you can also take a look at the they also took out I have to look again, but they basically took out some of our most complicated things. So they took out inheritance, Sarah, and they also took out recursion and 2D arrays. So those are the main 3 topics that they took out that we really are caring about. So recursion, we don't care about that. You don't have to call a method within itself to get a loop. You don't have to work with a 2D array, even though working with a 2D array is not all that different than working with a 1D array. And you don't have to worry about inheritance. So those 3 kind of complicated topics are out, which makes the AP exam, in my opinion, vastly easier. Okay, so let's get into how we're going to solve this problem. Hopefully my internet is starting to get back to working with us. And we're going to go ahead and say we're finding the row inside of each of these. And this is actually where all of our logic is going to come from, is inside of this loop, because we're going to be checking against each bit of information inside of a row, because we don't care about the whole data set. We only care about each row. So I'm going to go ahead and create an int at the top here, because I am going to need to hold some information. I'm going to hold that there, and I'm actually going to call it int first. And the reason I'm calling it first is because it's going to be the first piece of information in the row for each row. And that's how I'm going to compare the information. So I'm going to say another for loop here. And there's a few ways that we could do it, but really a for each loop works. And you could do this with a regular for loop. For int, and we'll go ahead and call this, I don't know, we'll call it bit. For int bit inside of row. And then we'll go ahead and nest our loop in here. So first thing we're going to do actually is we need to pull a bit of information out of row. So we're going to say that first equals our first column of data. Is it buffering a ton on your end? How many people do we actually have watching right now? Doesn't look like too many. Hopefully this will fix itself soon. I realize this is annoying. I'm sorry. I was hoping that it was just the gardeners with their weird... Oh, and my live stream cut out again. Come on. Come back to me. Come back to me. Okay, so it looks like the live stream is not really working. So I'm going to go ahead and just record this, and I will post a second video if you guys can hear me. And I'll post a review video on here and post a link to it on Canvas. Okay, I'm going to keep the stream going here, and hopefully that it tries to get on, but I will make sure to post this video separately so that you guys have an opportunity to look at this. Okay, let's get back into this. So if you're jumping into this, it's going to be the new video. We are working on has stuck, which a lot of you struggled with. First, we created an int first, which is going to keep track of the first digit in each row. Because remember, as soon as anything's different than the first digit, we know that we don't have a stuck sensor. So we just keep track of that first digit. If it's a 1, then we're going to keep track of that. If it is a 0, then we're going to keep track of that. And so anytime it changes, that's when we care that it's not stuck anymore. So we're going to keep track of that first piece of data. We're going to loop through twice. So the first loop is going to be what moves us down the column, and the second one is going to move us across the rows. And we can use for each loops for this. And as I mentioned before, we need to set this first piece of data, this first int, this first variable, to our first thing in the row. So we're going to say that this is worth row at 0. Okay, so that gives us our first thing. And so now we need to basically compare our first bit against all of the other bits. Now this will compare itself to itself, which adds an extra loop, which you might argue is a little bit slower, but really we don't care in this case. You could write a for loop that starts at the first position and skips the first one, but really doesn't change the algorithm a whole lot. So we're going to compare this. So if our first row, or first piece of data, does not equal our bit, then we know that we don't have a stuck sensor. Okay, now how do we handle this? Well, we have to check stuck sensors for each and every row. So we're going to need to check for each and every row. So we need something that stays persistent inside of this for loop, but is not necessarily persistent for the entire for loop. Because as soon as we see a stuck sensor, we can return that it has a stuck sensor, that's true, and we can go ahead and get out. So we're going to say Boolean here, and we're going to call this stuck, and we're going to assume that a sensor is always stuck. Okay, we're going to assume that it's stuck. And this basically says, I found something that is not stuck. So if this is different than the first bit, then I'm going to say stuck equals false. Now we could use some fancy things here and create a break, do some other things, but this is really all that we need. Okay, so as soon as something is different than the first bit, okay, as soon as our first does not equal where we are, then we're going to say stuck is false. And otherwise, stuck is still going to be true, right? So then we say if it's stuck, return stuck. Or return true, just for clarity. Now, if it makes it all the way through the outer for loop and the inner for loop so many times and it doesn't do return true, then we need to return false. We've searched the entire system and we haven't found a stuck sensor. So there we go. Okay, next thing. Get scan value. Almost everyone had get scan value correct, but we can make it a little bit faster for most of you. So what can we do? There's a few things that we can do that will make our lives pretty easy. Now, we don't need a double loop here. We only need a single loop because we only need to worry about one column within the series of rows. So we can use a for each loop here. So for our, I can spell integer. For our int row, and my computer wants to restart right now. For our integer array called row in our scan data, we're going to want to find information at a particular position in the row. So we're going to want to find row at column, right? The column that was passed in here. And we're going to want to see what happens for each piece of data at that row or at that particular column going down the rows, right? Going down the column in the rows, however you want to think about it. Basically going down this vertical line, right? That's what we're doing. So we're picking a row and then we're moving down column by column, same spot every single time. And we want to check what is in that position. There's a few different ways that we can do this. Probably the easiest way to do this would be to create an integer called count. And we'll set it equal to 0. Now, int count will keep track of the number of ones that we find. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to say count plus equals our row column data. Well, how does this work? Well, it works because if there's a 0 in that column, it's not going to add anything to it. It's only going to add something to it if there is a 1 in that position. So this will keep track of the ones for us without having to do much else. Okay, so then how do we find whether or not it's going to be a 1 or a 0? Well, it turns out that we can use the length of scan, because the length of scan is going to be the number of columns, or the number of, actually it's the number of rows, right? Because it's one, this is a row, this is a row, this is a row, this is a row, this is a row. So if our number of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So we have an odd number, and that's one of the things that we know is that our scan height is always going to be an odd number. So there can be 3 zeros and 3 ones. There's going to have to be a majority on one side or the other. So we can say that if count is greater than the length of our scan, or actually we can do scan height, right, is greater than our scan height divided by 2, then we know that we can have 1. And we can make this even easier. We can say return, we can use a ternary statement. We can say return this, question mark. If it's true, we're going to turn 1. Otherwise, we return 0. So ones, then the middle of our length Yes, Abbas, you caught me there. So we can use scan height, since scan height is a fixed amount in this case. So we can say return count scan height over 2. It's still better. Whoops, and we lost our stream again. I'm trying to upgrade to business class internet, but of course it will be here too late. So Abbas asked a question in the live stream here about, this is just a set number. Can we just use this as a set number? Yes, you can, but you want to avoid those magic numbers. So we want to try to write everything in terms of variables whenever possible. All right, so this is our solution for part B. Part C. Here we go. So for part C, what we're going to do is we are going to get the barcode data. And there's actually 3 things that we need to do in getting the barcode. So in getting the barcode, we first need to check if there's no stuck sensor. So we're first going to want to say if has stuck sensor, right? So if it has a stuck sensor, then we're going to want to return null. Okay, so if it has a stuck sensor, we want to return null. And some of you put this as stuck sensor double equals 0. Some of you forgot the parentheses. This is a method already in what we've written, right? So you don't have to call this or anything like that. Just if it has a stuck sensor, return null. And that saves us from having to do anything else. Now we need to create our barcode data. So we're going to create a new integer array, and we'll call it barcode. And our barcode is going to equal a new integer array of a particular size. And the particular size is going to be, says it right here, scan width -1. So this needs to be scan width -1. This little -1 is going to cause us an issue in a few moments. So what do we need to do? We need to run through, loop through the array, and fill our barcode with the data from our scan data. So we're going to create a for loop. Okay, so for int I equals 0. And the reason I'm using a regular for loop in this case is because I need to change and manipulate data in specific positions. So I don't want to use a for each loop in this case. As long as our I is less than scan width -1, and we're going to say I++. Okay, so we've created our new barcode. We have started to build our new barcode data that we will output. What do we need to do? We need to do actually a couple of things inside of this for loop. First thing we need to do is we need to put the data inside of our barcode. So inside of our barcode, we're going to need to say barcode at our ith position. We need to fill that with data. And we're going to fill it with our get scan value at our ith position, because that's keeping track of our column. So get scan value at I. Many of you got this. This was great. So that's our first bit of information that we need to solve. The other thing that we need to do is we're going to need to solve for parity. So this creates our output. This doesn't check if it's a valid piece of data. So how do we check that this is a valid piece of data? We check that this is a valid piece of data by doing that parity check. And the parity check is that it has to be an odd number of ones. And we can do a similar technique that we did up here in terms of finding out whether or not this is odd. Now you could do this in 2 loops. You can also do it in 1 loop. So we can compact this all into 1 loop. The sample solution, for those of you who had it marked complete, actually had this in 2 loops. But now that I think about it, you can jam all of this into 1. So we're going to create a new int count again, and we're going to set it to 0. And then we're just going to say count plus equals barcode at I. So again, we're doing the same thing where count is just going to keep track of the number of ones. So if this is a 0, it's not going to add anything to count, and it's not going to affect our output. But if this is a 1, it's going to add 1 to count. So that's great. So then we need to do a quick check. We need to do our parity check. So if our count mod 2 double equals 1, then we're going to, or actually we want to say if it doesn't equal 1, right? So if it's not right, then we're going to want to return null here. But there's a slight problem with this. And the problem is that scan width is -1, and our parity check checks the entire set of data from our scan data. It doesn't just check the barcode output. It needs that last bit of information to do this. And this is actually how real barcodes work. Real barcodes have these checks. They're much more complex than this, but this is essentially how they work. They have what's called a checksum. And all barcodes, when you run them, there are special mathematical tricks in them that always give the same output. And you can have any random set of information in there, but it will always come out to the same checksum. So it's kind of cool. This is one of my favorite things about this exercise. It's very real life in terms of what you might actually do for a low-level program like this. Okay, so we need to get that extra checksum value at the end. And the easiest way to do that is to just say count plus equals barcode at what? Actually, it's not barcode. It's get scan width, or get scan value. At which column? At scan width -1. So it gets the very last little bit of data on the end. This is the hanging bit of data. Because we used this less than, we're not actually grabbing the last bit of information. Now we're going to grab the last bit of information and we can do our parity check. So if we passed our parity check, we've passed our has stuck sensor, we've built our output barcode. Now we can go ahead and say return barcode. I can spell that right. Okay, so this is it. Let's see. Let's first, I'm going to first click run and see if I have any errors. This should always be our first thing. We're going to click run. I'm probably missing a semicolon somewhere. Nope. Hey, I typed Java correctly, so there's no Java errors. Let's go ahead and run tests. Let's see how I did. And it looks like, yep, we passed all of the tests. All right, so much better than the last review thing that I did on CodingBat yesterday. So hopefully this gives you guys an idea of the thought processes of solving this problem. Fairly compact answer. If you answered it and said submit without completing the tests, I have already given you feedback on how to solve your own problem. And so that you can do that, and you will see a different solution answer, slightly different than what I've done here, that you can run and mess around with. Let's see, it's 1:30, so I'll go ahead and do a couple of CodingBat exercises, and then we'll wrap up for today. Okay, let's go ahead and I like the sound of scores average on CodingBat. Oops, I'm off live here. There we go. So I'm on CodingBat now, problem P123837 here. So let's take a look. Let's see how I do. Given an array of scores, compute an int average of the first half and second half, and return whichever is larger. We'll say that the second half begins at index length divided by 2. The array length will have at least 2. To practice decomposition, write a separate helper method, int average, which takes an integer of scores, an integer start, integer ends, which computes the average of the elements between index start and end. Call your helper method twice to implement scores average. Write your helper method after your scores average method in the JavaBat text area. Normally you would compute averages with doubles, but here we use ints, so expected results are exact. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. So we're going to want to create our public, or it could be private, but I'm going to go ahead and say public just because I don't know how the back end works. Public int. I can spell public, right? Public. And they want us to call this average. Average. And we're going to take in an integer array. And we're going to call it scores. And we're going to have an int start and an int end. And we're going to go ahead and write that here. Okay. So our new method is going to average a set of data. And let's think about what an average is. So an average, let me go ahead and increase this font size so you can see it a little bit better. So an average here makes it so we sum all the numbers, right? Sum, and then we're going to divide that by the number of numbers, right? So the count, right? Sum divided by the count of numbers. So that's really all that we need to do, is we need to go through and loop this array and sum it up and then divide by the number of things that we summed up. So we need to first create an int called sum. And we're going to take that sum and first set it to 0 just to make it safe. And we're going to create a quick for loop. And we can create a for each loop since we're not really manipulating data. We're just using data. So for our int add inside of scores, we can say sum plus equals add. Simple. And from here, we're going to divide sum by our end. And we're going to return that result. So we're going to say return our sum divided by our start, or actually it's going to be our end minus our start. So we're going to take our integer array of scores in. We're going to create a sum. We're going to add all the things in that integer array, and we're going to return the average of that. And this is all integer math because that's what it's asking for. So then we need to call our integer or our method averages here. And we're going to call it this way. We're going to say, once I can think about it for a second, we're going to say we need to average the first half, right? So we're going to say average, I can spell, average our scores. Okay, so we need to first pass in scores. Then our start will be what? Our start will be 0 on the first one. And our end will be scores.length divided by 2 minus 1. Right? So this whole thing evaluates to an integer, but just to be on the safe side, we'll put an extra set of parentheses just to make sure that it's really clear that this is supposed to sit inside of this 1 comma. Okay? And then what we're going to do, we're going to do the same thing again, average our scores. And now we're going to say scores.length over 2 and score.length, scores. Length minus 1. Okay, so we don't get an index out of bounds exception here at the end. Now we need to compare these two things. So we're going to say int first equals this. And we're going to say int second equals this. And now we're going to compare them. So if first is bigger than second, return first. Otherwise, return second. Boy, I'm off today. There it is. There's my pinky. Okay, so this will average the first half, then average the second half. If the first half is bigger, it's going to return it. Otherwise, it's going to return the second half because that will automatically be the next one. Let's see if it works. I got them all wrong. So what am I doing wrong here? On line 12, I'm getting a divide by 0 error. And the minus start would be 1. Oh, because that's giving me minus 1 here. So let's try this with a plus 1. And now I'm getting a divide by 0 error here. It's not dividing properly. Really, not dividing properly. I'm not dividing properly. So it's adding up, and we're getting an answer of 18 here. 1, 2, 3, and it's showing. How is it even getting to 18? So it's showing me that it's getting 18. It's getting 18 again here. It's getting 11. So it's summing all of these numbers. Oh, I know why. Because I'm summing everything in the side of here. For each loop. Bad move, Mr. Webster. So we're going to say int. We're going to go ahead and say I equals start. Of course. And as long as I is less than end, then we can go ahead and say I plus plus. And we're going to say that we're going to say scores at I. There we go. Now we're getting better. And we're still getting a divide by 0 exception here. On line 12, and we're getting an average problem of divide by 0, and we're getting that. So why are we getting a divide by 0 problem when we're here? And we should be getting... Let me see here. Length over 2. Length length over 2 plus 1. It doesn't tell me which run of that it's getting it in. And I'm getting 5 on that run. So is it just always returning the first one? That's bigger than that. One, two, three, 4. 1, 2, 3. So let's do how I had it before. We're going to go ahead and delete that there. We're going to say this minus 1. And let's go ahead and say, I'm going to get 0 exceptions on those ones again. Yeah. So if I just take out that, now let's see, I get 0 exceptions again. So, so let me think about this. If our length if our start is at 0 and our end is at 1, that's 1 minus 0 is 1. That's not a problem. If our end is, oh no, it's 0 and 0, right? Ah, yes. So we're going to have to create a quick check here. So if end double equals 0, then we're going to say end equals 1. And that should solve it. No. Oh, because then we have start at the same thing. So if end double equals start, end plus plus. Closer, no exceptions. So why is it picking only the first one? 4, 4. It's picking the second one there, first one there, first one there. And minus 1, so it'd be 2 minus 1 is 1. Sum over 1, 6 over 1. It's giving me 5 there. We're almost there. It would be, that would be 1, trace it really quick. So if our int, so if scores is 5, 6, and then we're going to put in our start at 1 and our end at 1, then what we do is that goes in, it grabs 6, puts it into sum. The sum is 6. And we get out of that because I is not less than end. So then we can go ahead and be done. Okay. So now, is that all of it? Is it the only thing I need to check is an equal? That shouldn't solve it. Let's go ahead and... No, that's definitely not it. Okay, so this is it. So then first, if first is bigger than second, return first. But first shouldn't be bigger than second in this case. The sum is 6. Since start and end are the same, we add 1 to end, which means this is 2 minus 1, which is 1. 6 divided by 1 is 1. We shouldn't have an error. Okay, so let's make sure we do this right. First, we length over 2. Since the length is 2, that's going to be 1. It's going to give us an index out of bounds error again, or a divide by 0 error again. Or maybe it does want the +1 here. No, we're still not getting that right, even with +1 there. It's over 2. That's over 2. Why is it not seeing 5 is bigger? 5 is less than 6. Let's check and see if this is working. That should give us a whole bunch of errors. Yep, everything's wrong. Ah, this is interesting. Okay, so it was saying... length minus 1 here. This is my issue, see, because this returns 0, so I know that this is not doing this. Okay, so it showed me what the other side of it is. Good. So my length minus 1 here, I don't need it because I'm doing less than. And I screwed myself up there. All right, I think I've wasted enough of your time with my own inability to sometimes solve these problems. These off by 1 errors, usually they're not going to cause a big issue on the AP exam. It might be the difference between a 4 and a 5, but definitely will not be the difference between a passing grade. Okay, I'm the only one watching on the live stream right now. I will post, this video will be up on the live stream, and I will make sure everyone can see it. Have a great day, everyone. We have just 2 days until the AP exam. You should be seeing that email in your inbox. Have a great day, everyone.